Hi, my name is Jenny and I am a member of the Guelph Guild of Storytellers, and I am here to share a story with you. Oh, I see you. I see you watching me out of the corner of your eye as I walk by. These old ears, they hear your whispers of mocking, saying impossible. But it is possible, and it is true. In fact, Edward Albert, Prince of Wales, will graciously confirm to you that I am who you think I might be in this old, wrinkled body, this old, worn body. He'll even tell you that the events of June 22nd, 1813 did happen, that they do matter, and they hold some significance. You know, it's only taken 40 some odd years for me to hear those words of recognition tickle my ears of that amazing, incredible long journey I took so long ago. I am still waiting for compensation and pension for me and my husband and our contribution at that time. I am now an old woman of 80, and I doubt I'll see that in my lifetime. By the time that happens, I'll be buried in the ground next to my husband, finally at rest and at peace. But since you are here and sincere in your interest in my story, I will tell it to you. And I'm going to start by telling you that war and battle bring out the beast in men. It stirs the souls of everyone who it touches, especially the families of those soldiers. I myself am the daughter of Major Thomas Ingersoll of the American Revolution and wife of James Secord, Sergeant of the 1st Lincoln Militia under the direction of Sir Isaac Brock. I have been schooled in the subject of war more deeply and long than I wish. I knew in the late summer of 1812 that the advance of those American soldiers was just a matter of time. I knew it especially after James had told me of the great success that Sir Isaac Brock and Tecumseh, chief of the Shawnee Nation, had in securing Fort Detroit, for they secured it by surrender. Not a single gun was fired, not a single life was lost. It was a wonderful big win for the British. I knew that that was just the calm before the storm. I knew that that was the breath before the fire would be stoked. War has a way of seeping into everything, to every life. It has a way of, like shadows, blinding you. It pulses in the air. It hangs. It's fear. Fear of the unknown. It is fear of the American soldier. That American soldier who had to fight all of the wilds of this nation, all of the forests, for there were no roads. There were no paths laid before them. They had to fight that before they could fight us, their enemy. And there was no promise of shelter and no promise of food or wages. And that is where the beast of war would feast on their exhaustion. It would feast on their anger, and it would feed their duty. Take what you need. Take what you want to be successful, to complete your duty as a soldier. It wasn't long after the capture of Fort Detroit that I noticed in Queenston, where I'm from, a small trading post, that suddenly there were lots of American soldiers all around, taking, killing, bullying, and then taking some more. Now, my husband fought under Sir Isaac Brock one more time in the Battle of Queenston Heights. It was one of the most gruesome battles. And we lost Sir Isaac Brock. It was a very sad time. But in that battle also, my husband was severely wounded in his leg and in his shoulder. As soon as I heard that news, I fled to his side to bring him home. When I found him, there were 3 American soldiers circling him, their guns raised, ready to beat him as if he was some sort of wild animal that needed to be killed and put out of his misery. "Stop!" I screamed. I placed myself between the soldiers and my husband, laying my hand on James's arm. "Please," I softened my cry, tears in my eyes. "Please, this man is my husband. He is severely wounded. Look at him. He is not going back to battle. He is no threat to you. I've come to take him home, please. We have 5 children. I cannot raise them alone. Please let me bring my husband home. Please. I beg you." A moment later, a man by the name of Captain Wool appeared. And I don't know what happened to those soldiers, but what I do know is that we were able to go and leave and go home. And I also know that Captain White saved our lives that day. And once we got home, all we could find were our 5 children, hungry, anxious, and scared. All we could do was look at our empty cupboards. No food, no supplies. But James was home, and that was the most important thing. So over the next several months, we rebuilt our stores. We finally had food in the cupboard and some things, some supplies, some blankets, and we were able to make James as comfortable as he possibly could be. His wounds, they were deep and they were devastating. So in addition to looking after the children and looking after our home, I now also had to play nurse and look after James's wounds and make sure they were clean and taken care of every single day. Because if I didn't, infection surely would fester and kill James. Bang! 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 The American soldiers were on our doorstep. Bang! 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 I looked at James. I looked at the children. I looked at the door. All I could do was open it. I tried to nod to the children to assure them as much as I could without saying a single word. I stood tall. I swallowed, and with a shaking hand, I opened the door of our home to these soldiers. And they pushed their way through, demanding food and shelter, and sitting at our table as if it was their own, living in our house. One night while I was tucking the children into bed, my heart stopped and my mind raced with images only war could create. I heard the soldiers talking about a plan to attack the British, a plan that would overtake Queenston, a plan that would happen in 2 days. I'm a clever woman, and I am schooled in war, and I learned from my husband and from my father that if this battle was won, if this battle took place, life in Queenston would be far worse and more devastating before it would ever get better. I knew right then, in that moment, I had to go. I had to warn the British. I had to find Fitzgibbons. So, the next morning, I took my shawl and I wrapped it around my shoulders. I went and I kissed my husband and all 5 of my children on their cheeks and foreheads, and I told each one how much I loved them, just in case I didn't return. I softly closed the door behind me. As I watched the Americans sleep in my home, I slipped off as quietly as I could. Now the journey, it was far more arduous than I had anticipated. I walked all day and into the early night, through wild forests and brush, trekking through rivers, losing my shoes, avoiding the main roads because American soldiers were everywhere. And I knew from listening to the men who lived in my home, I knew what was in the minds and the hearts of those soldiers. And I knew the beast of war would think nothing of killing a strange woman in the woods who might be a spy, to leave my body there on the dirt floor to feast or feed the insects and the wild animals. No one would know. I would hide behind bushes and trees. And as the evening came on and dusk began to rise, I started to get attacked by mosquitoes. I was covered in sweat and tears, and fear started to wrap around me, thinking that I might not make it, that I may not reach the British in time. Snap! What was that? A twig? And then I heard it, the shuffle of feet along the dirt floor, not of one man, but of many. I stood there like a deer, frozen, watching and listening, wondering who or what was about to come out and attack me. This man, this very, very tall man, stepped out from behind a bush, and the sun making its final plunge into the skyline behind him silhouetted him so much I couldn't see his face. But what I could tell is he wasn't a soldier of any sort. He was a warrior, an indigenous warrior. He was young, he was strong, and he had a band of men behind him. I knew this was my last chance, my last opportunity. I had to approach this young man. I locked eyes with him, hoping that he knew some English and hoping that my pleas would be understood. The Americans, they're going to attack. In 2 days, please, take me to the British, take me to Fitzgibbons, please. Time is running out. The young man sized me up, and after a moment he nodded to his men, and he led the way, and before I knew it, we were crossing the threshold of a building where Fitzgibbons was. I was exhausted, and my feet bloody and torn, but I took what strength I had left, and I repeated every single thing I heard what the American soldiers said. I told the British, word for word, everything I heard. And when I was done, they gave me some food and a place to rest. And they took that young man who escorted me to their door, and they all went into another room. I found out later that young man's name was John Tutela. Now, I want you to remember this one thing from my story, if nothing else. The indigenous people of this land, they are brave, they are strong, they are clever, and I believe they are our friends. Now, I know my neighbors may not agree with that and look down upon me as a crazy old woman to say such a thing. But as our friends, we must look out for each other. We must look out for them as they look out for us. We must trust each other, stand next to each other, just as Tecumseh and Brock, Tutela and I. It is the only way that we're going to build a strong and free nation in this wild land that we all live. We must honor the friends we have made in war, because if we don't, we will lose so much more that we have fought for to try and keep. Now, you might look at me and think, she's a crazy old lady. Or perhaps you see me as a wise old woman. Whichever it is, that is up to you, my friend. But this is my story, and yes, I am Laura Secord.